Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and for all the fuss made at the weekend over Extinction Rebellion's delay of some newspapers getting to their stands, the Council of Europe has made clear that the threat to press freedom in the UK really lies at the feet of Boris Johnson's government. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, finally, I said earlier in the week that under normal circumstances, you know, when you've got an international organisation formally ticking off your country, and not for the first time, for violating the freedom of the press, you would think that would be major political news. But while Boris Johnson is Prime Minister, it often gets pushed right down. In fact, it's nowhere near the most important political news of the week, the month, or even the year. But no, nearly a week later, but finally, I've got enough time to actually talk about it, unless Boris Johnson's going to do another thing. No, it seems quiet enough at the moment, thank goodness. So at the weekend, the climate group Extinction Rebellion blocked the distribution of a number of right-wing, but more specifically climate change suppressing newspapers from making their way to newsstands around London. Now, this was attacked by those newspapers, of course, they weren't happy, but also Conservative politicians, right-wing commentators, and of course including members of the government, as an obscene attack on the freedom of the press. Now, I'm not in favour of this move. I'm not going to say, well, no, it's not an attack on the freedom of the press, because obviously it is. But it doesn't matter that those newspapers abuse their press freedom. They do. But, let's be clear, delaying those newspapers being read on one particular day by, a limited and specific group of people is nothing like the same scale of attack on press freedom that Boris Johnson has engaged in whilst being Prime Minister. And that is what has been called out yet again by the Council of Europe. Now, by the way, I can't wait to hear people say, well, we won't have to put up with those for much longer once the end of the transition period. I cannot wait. Anyway, never mind. The council have issued a level 2 media freedom alert, which is the second one of this year. I'm actually surprised in many ways there haven't been more. But the first one was when the government excluded journalists from certain COVID briefings. Now, this because they were asking questions they didn't like. This latest one was specifically in reference to the Ministry of the Ministry of Defence, who refused to deal with a media organisation that runs defence policy stories. They asked a question they didn't like and they just went, we're not going to deal with you anymore. Well, now, obviously, it's not quite on the same scale as alerts issued to states who have journalists beaten up or removed from existence. Although Boris Johnson, of course, was famously involved some years ago in a plot to have a journalist beaten up in this country. But it still represents the result of the British government deliberately failing to support press freedom. And at a time, it happened at the same time as government ministers were falling over themselves to talk about the importance of press freedom. Only when it suits them, it seems. And the Conservatives, it's baffling to me, genuinely baffling, why they should ever feel the need to attack the freedom of the press. You would think they would love it, absolutely love it, be fully on board with it. Not because it's the right thing to do, but because it doesn't hurt them in the slightest. They already have the bulk of the media batting for them. The vast majority of the country's newspapers support them. And not just in terms of numbers of newspapers, but in terms of the overall distribution. And it doesn't matter whether they're in government or in opposition. Only The Guardian and The Mirror, in terms of the printed press, call them out on a regular basis. Now, when it comes to the television news, they've got the BBC firmly under their thumb. So boycotting these small number of media outlets, because that's what's been happening, particularly under COVID, people have asked awkward questions. They've ended up boycotting, the likes of Channel 4 News, for example. And all of these outlets have got a way smaller circulation than their Tory supporting rivals. The net effect is still largely pro-conservative. And just because you don't allow correspondents from these other outlets to ask questions doesn't mean they're not going to report on it. You just don't get to put your point of view across. They'll still report what they were going to ask and just say that you refused to answer. And I think at best it's completely unnecessary. And at worst, it's actually counterproductive. They're actually damaging themselves. I mean, the danger to all of us, of course, of any sort of suppression of freedom of the press is obvious, because press freedom, even for a press that doesn't take its responsibility seriously, as is the case in the UK, is still essential for holding a government to account. It is still better that we have the press situation we have now than no freedom of the press at all. Limiting the field of journalists asking questions means that some parts of the population are not going to be represented. So therefore, it's undemocratic. It also means that you create a culture whereby the media, the idea is the media are only going to send subservient correspondents to briefings who will ask questions where either the answer will be of no value at all to anybody, or they will ask useful questions, but when the minister either responds with something that's not true or doesn't answer the question at all, they don't pull them up on it. Now, naturally, for a corrupt government, that is the point. But Boris Johnson's team isn't just corrupt, it's also inept, because these bullying tactics only really work if you pick on small groups. We can see that with the way the government have suddenly decided to blame the sudden surge in COVID cases on young people. That's what they've done. They need to blame the public to distract from their own incompetence. They can't blame themselves, so they have to blame the public. But they can't blame the whole public. That's not going to work for the next election. So what you do is they blame the younger population, because there are two benefits for them. One, most young people don't vote. So learning point number one, if you're young, go and bloody well vote next time. But most people don't vote. Secondly, when they do vote, tend not to vote Conservative anyway. So by blaming young people, there's not really a great political cost, because they're targeting people who don't really vote for them anyway. And the media assault isn't playing by that rule, however, because as part of their refusal to accept any criticism, any at all, they've been excluding journalists from even right-wing Conservative supporting media. Now, the result then is that, well, they just write what they want. This is why, like the Times, the Financial Times, the Telegraph, even the Mail, all papers that would normally support the Conservatives, and they'll support the Conservatives at the next election just like they did the last one, and would normally support the Conservative leader without question, are all laying into Boris Johnson. Divide and rule doesn't really work when you present yourself as the common enemy. And I also saw another report about a tactic. Now, I didn't know about this. So what's been happening, and this is the government embarrassingly getting this wrong. So in their war against the media, what would happen is normally if a journalist has a scoop, it has a bit of a thing on the government it's going to publish, and it's probably not going to be entirely complimentary towards the government. But what they do is they want to get the government side of things. So they give the government advance notice. Look, I'm going to run this story. What do you want to comment? Do you want me to add your comments in? And the government can choose to do that or not. But if they do, then that defence of it will go into the article. But what Downing Street apparently have been doing is, when a journalist has been doing this, they've simply just shared the story with the wider press. Well, it's going to be released anyway. We'll just share it with everyone, and then our supporters in the media, they can paint it differently. Which means the original journalist, of course, doesn't get their exclusive, because then all the press are reporting on it. So what's the end result of that? Well, journalists like their exclusives, helps their papers sell more. And so what they're now doing is, of course, they're no longer giving notice of the stories to the government, because they're not going to lose their exclusive. So now what's happening is they're basically giving the government half an hour's notice. Apparently, they're saying to the government, look, we're running this story in half an hour. Do you want to give a quick comment? Yes or no? No? All right, then we'll just run it as we wanted to. Which means they retain their exclusive. The government doesn't get enough time to consider a response. It gets caught completely on the hop, exposing them because they didn't anticipate this. So they end up then with a confused message coming out when the story breaks because they've had literally half an hour's notice, making them look much worse, resulting, in potentially ministers or spokespeople contradicting each other as well, which can then run into another story. So like I said, this war on the press freedom makes no sense at all, because if they didn't exclude journalists, if they talked to them, because there's nothing to if you invite a Guardian journalist, or if you go on the Channel 4 News, there's nothing to stop them just not answering the question. And if the correspondent says you're not answering the question, they go, well, I think what you'll find is I have, or the usual ministerial response is, well, I think what most of the public really want to know is this, and then you talk about what you want to talk about. That has worked in time immemorial. Does Boris Johnson really think he's the first government who's ever had to face a hostile press? No, they've been doing it for decades, generations, centuries even. You just face them down. You just go, oh, that's a really interesting question. Let me try and answer it like this. No, that doesn't answer the question. Ah, yeah, that's quite interesting. I think what most people are interested in this, though, there's so many tricks. It's so easy to just completely fudge even the worst of all questions. And absolutely, those media outlets will publish that you didn't answer the question properly and all the rest of it, but they'll do that anyway. What's to be gained here? Nothing. You just end up looking foolish, looking undemocratic, looking like you're attacking the freedom of the press, which is exactly what's happening. And what does that do? It puts the media's backs up. And when you're even doing that to the ones who would normally support you, what happens? You lose that support. And what has happened? Boris Johnson has lost 4 major right-wing newspapers in this country. But as I say, if you're going to have an evil government, I would much prefer that evil government was completely incompetent as well. Much better than having calculating evil where their evil schemes will actually work out. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.